Hello, everyone. Welcome to School After Hours podcast, where we talk about all things related to out of school time programming and education. I am your host, Jay Lee, and on today's show, we are going to talk about grant funding and how to prepare the best grant proposals so you can get as much money as you can for your organization, your after school program, your nonprofit in this grant season. I thought it would be great to invite someone that I know that is great at this process and that is amazing. Grant collaborator Shavon Dotson. In this episode, we're going to talk about the lack of access small organizations have to grant funding compared to big organizations and how that process can be changed in the OST community. We also talk about the grant process and what details to look for when applying for grants for your organization. We also jump into the importance of having a budget so you could go ahead and list your realistic expectations for the money that you're going to get or for program growth that you're trying to accomplish. And last but not least, we talk about the power of proofreading. Y'all, we be leaving so much money on the table because we're not checking our grammatical errors as well as our spelling. But we're going to jump into that in a few moments and much more. So, before we get to our interview, let's jump into our Community Corner. Community Corner is a segment of the show that allows guests or myself to share tips, advice, or information on a specific topic with young people, families, or community members. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our Community Corner conversation. So, Shavon, for Community Corner, what are 3 things new after-school programs need to know about grant funding?
So I think that's a really good question. 3 things new after school programs should know about grant funding is number 1, make sure you have a logic model or some type of theory of change for your programs because that is always going to be required in any type of grant funding that you're going to apply for. I know we do a lot of great things in the community. Sometimes we don't write those things down and have like a real reason behind the real outcomes attached to them. So just make sure you have either a logic model or a theory of change written, agreed upon, and how you're going to get to your outcomes. That's number 1. Number 2, have a good budget. Have a budget that makes sense for your program. I love that people want to reach for the stars, the moon, the sun, everything. But a lot of the time, people don't really think about how they're going to spend their money. We just get excited that money is available and we start saying, we're going to do this, we're going to spend it on this. So just make sure that you have a realistic budget for your program. Okay. So that's number 2. And then the third thing is I would really recommend people have a team, whether it's volunteers, whether it's additional staff members, whether it's your board, have a team that will be able to review your grant proposal before you submit. I have seen a lot of grant proposals with a lot of grammatical errors. And yes, we get dinged on that. So just have a team, and it doesn't have to be anyone like super official, but you could have volunteers. Listen, if you work with older youth, have your older youth review your grant proposals and have them look out for grammatical errors or things don't make sense. Because I know when we're writing, we know what we're trying to communicate. So we're just like, yes, I'm going to write this. Sometimes it doesn't read like that. So I would definitely suggest, when you're in grant season, have a team ready to review some of your grant proposals before you submit them. That is going to be able to give you just a fresh set of eyes on things. And you know that you're really submitting the best that you have.
Thank you for sharing those tips with us, Shavon. Now, let's go ahead and jump into this interview. How are you?
I am doing well. I am in very cold weather right now. And I feel like it's always cold here, no matter what time of year. So I'm cold, but I'm
Mm,
doing good.
good. It'd be a little chilly, but you're in a proper surrounding. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it's cold.
So, Shavon, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved into after school programming.
I love sharing this story. So I actually got involved in out of school time programming when I was 18 years old. I did it in my college campus. So I came to college on a scholarship, my scholarship program. And when I started working on the campus, I was just like, well, I want to do something that's really not going to take too much of my time and really not going to be too hard. So I actually started working with my scholarship program, and they had a elementary school tutoring program that was after school on our campus. And so I started working the reception. And then I moved to like being a tutor, and then I moved to summer program. So I worked that program my entire college career, actually. And it allowed me to have a lot of really great experience because I helped create new programs, right? Like
Mm.
I would be able to have a seat at the table when we're talking about community assessments. What did our young people need? What was missing? Because I came in through that program, I was there to give that lens, but also because I was actively working in that program, I gave the lens as a staff member as well. So it really allowed me to have a lot of insight as to like some of the planning and the discussions that go on when you're putting out of school time programs together. And it was really fun. So I was just like, when I graduated from college, I was like, I think I'm gonna keep doing this. And honestly, I've just been doing it ever since. Every job that I have had, it has been working in out of school time program in some way, shape, or form. I tell everyone I have held so many positions in this field from volunteer, right? I have been over the facilities, and I tell people, yes, I have had to like clean up the toilets. Okay, yes,
That's
I
that
have
grunt
been
work.
the
We
person.
start from the bottom.
I'm telling you, like I have had to do that. I have been the person that has had to, fix the AC and change filters. Listen, I have done it all. I've been a director. I've done development, and I do a lot of professional development now, like staff training. So I've held a lot of positions in this field, and I really love it because it gives me an opportunity to come with a broad sense of experience.
Mm. So you have done literally almost everything in out of school time program.
Yes, I have. And I tell people that all the time. Yes, I have.
So then after having all that experience and doing so many things and playing so many roles, like what led you to grant writing and entrepreneurship?
Honestly, because like I said, doing all of those roles, you have to have your hands in so many different pots. And one of the things I would always try to do was try to find us little buckets of money. Right. So for me, especially when I was a director, if you're looking to find buckets of money, it's like, well, I'm not very well versed in this. So let me do my due diligence of learning about this. I actually took some like grant writing courses online, spoke to a lot of people who are also in the grant writing field as well, which really prepared me for one of the last full-time jobs that I had was managing our organization's like full budget. It was about $10 million. And it was a lot of grants, federal grants and local grants that I had to manage. So I was then forced to learn more about the process, learn more about the codes, really learn how to budget. And then when I reached out to a colleague of mine who's also in this field, I was just like, I think I want to learn more about this. She gave me the best advice ever. She said, if you want to learn more about grant writing, become a grant reviewer.
Hmm.
I said, okay. And she was just like, it's a volunteer role. Typically people don't pay at that level. So look for opportunities for you to be able to review some grants. And I
Hmm.
said, okie dokie. So then I found opportunities to be able to be a grant reviewer. And I have been a grant reviewer probably for about 4 years now.
Oh, nice.
And so being a grant reviewer puts you on the other side. And as you're reviewing grants, you're
Mm.
like, yeah, that don't make sense. No, they didn't answer those questions, right? Like these numbers don't add up.
Hmm.
So when you put together experience in grant management, being a grant reviewer, understanding different types of grant funds, I felt like it put me in a really great position to share that information with other people who
Mm-hmm.
also might be interested in trying to get funding for their programs. And I've had to have so many conversations with after school programs who do amazing work. I mean, amazing work, right? But I've had to have conversations with them like, no, you're not going to get funded for this because although you do great work in the community, it's not written, right? Like your documentation is not providing the evidence of all of the great work that you do. And how do I know that they do great work? Because I'm also an external assessor. So I go out and I see these programs, but I'm just like, ugh, unfortunately, what I've seen and what is written are two totally different things. So I encourage them and I would coach them and give them tips and tricks on here's what you can do to go back to really beef up your grant proposal,
Mm-hmm.
be more specific on what you're offering, really think about your outcomes, really tie it to an evidence-based curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was just like, hey, I want to help more organizations out here be able to get grant ready and get attached to funding because you know as well as I do, there is a financial equity issue that is happening. We have programs that do amazing work. They work with, you know, at-risk youth who really need the services.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, they don't have access. They don't
Mm-hmm.
have equitable access to the right funding streams that are going to be able to sustain their programs, help them expand their programs, right? And so I want to help them. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to offer them insight because I get tired of some of the same big organizations getting the grants time
Mm-hmm.
after time. It's like if you see a proposal, you know, oh, if they applied, I know they're about to get it. And it's because they have a whole team of people who
Right.
are on staff and who know how to get these proposals ready.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to be able to offer insight to our
Mm-hmm.
smaller nonprofits who are
Mm-hmm.
doing amazing work. They just need a little bit of help
Mm-hmm.
making sure that the great work they're doing out in the community is also being reflected in
Mm-hmm.
written format in their proposals as well.
Right. So let's unpack that for a minute.
Mhm.
Because I feel a lot of what you're saying is like over the moon, like to the universe and the galaxy true. So is it a question of when it comes to smaller organizations that are making these huge impacts, is it a case of not having enough or the right information? And then once having that information, putting it into practice.
I think it is about people don't have enough information about how grant making works,
Mm.
right? When you typically have a smaller nonprofit, a smaller organization, when they hear money is available and people are just like, oh, you guys are doing great, go apply for this grant, they get excited, rightfully
Mhm.
so. It's just like, oh, what if we did get $500,000? Especially if they're just like, well, typically our budget has just been $100,000. So if we get $500,000, imagine what we can do. And then they start reaching for the moon, the stars, the universe, right? Without thinking about realistically, what do you
Mm.
have the capacity to provide?
Okay.
Not only that, what will the grant cover? Some people don't take the time to read the fine print to understand allowable charges versus non allowable charges when it comes to grants. And that's how people typically leave a lot of money on the table, or they even get denied a grant because their budget is reflective of a lot of things that will not be covered by that grant. And then
Mhm.
they're stuck wondering, like, well, what happened? Or sometimes it reads as though it's beyond your capacity to be able to do the things you say you want to do
Mhm.
because people are just like $500,000, $750,000, woo! But it's like, hey, if it's only 3 people working in your organization,
Yeah.
how are y'all going to spend that much money in a year? And not
Mhm.
even, I remind people, it's not even the full year because you have to think about how grant making works. You have your proposal period, you have your review period, you have your award period, and then you have your disbursement period. And I remind people, when you get a grant, it is reimbursement.
Mm-hmm.
You don't typically get initially dispersed this whole bunch of money.
Mm-hmm.
So if you cannot afford to spend the money up front and then reimburse for it, don't put yourself in that predicament. And that's what happens with a lot of people. They're just like, well, we were waiting till we got the money to be able to do all these things, right? And it's like, no, 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 no. You have to prove that you did the thing first and you did it according to the guidelines. And then you have to invoice for it. And then they're going to give you your money back, right? There may be an initial disbursement that happens, but typically that might be like 10%.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that might be like, 20%, whatever the guidelines are for that specific grant. But people just don't know how the process works.
Mm-hmm.
So it puts them in a bind, and then they're doing all of this waiting, or they're like, oh, well, we thought we could do all of this stuff, but the money didn't come in until the 11th hour. And then you have 2 months to spend $500,000 and you only got 3 staff and 15 students. Right?
Yeah,
It's
no,
like,
that's not gonna work.
you're about to give back so much of that money.
Right.
And that typically is what trips a lot of organizations up.
There's a whole lot you gave. I want to tackle something.
Yeah.
So, like, you made the point of knowing what type of money you can spend and where to allocate it. Like, where do organizations begin to make that defining line? Because, like you said, that's where we get hung up between what you can spend on this particular item and what you can't spend. Because you can't go out here because you got this money and buy, and you can get a laptop, and everybody go home with a laptop. That's not how that works.
It's not, y'all.
That's not how that works.
But that's what people do.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, oh, you know what? Well, what we thought we were going to spend the money on initially, we changed our mind. So now we want to go off and we want to buy everybody new Chromebooks and every student's going to get a laptop. And it's just like, first of all, you can't change your mind on what you were going to spend the money on. If you wrote into your budget that $40,000 was going to go to professional development or whatever the thing is, and then you decide, just kidding, guys, we actually weren't going to go that route. We're going to pivot, and instead we're going to give it to technology. Yeah, like that's actually not something that you can do, especially without making sure that it is approved. So you have to go through a budget modification, and budget modifications aren't always approved because spending that much money in technology will require you to sometimes have to go through a very special procurement process, especially if you're dealing with federal dollars. Like, yeah, they want to support your use of technology in your programs, but you have to make sure it's approved on the front end. Trying to do it on the back end, I can't tell you this past year how many organizations I had to tell no to. And they were like, well, but we just want to be able to get all of this technology because we have been using this and now we need to pivot. And I was just like, unfortunately, it's May. Your program ends in June. It's not an approved charge book. And we should have had this discussion months ago, right? You should have really thought about if you wanted to enhance your technology or include technology on the front end, because you could have gone through the proper channels and gone through the proper processes. Again, sometimes there are certain procurement measures, like you may have to go through certain vendors. You can't just go to Best Buy.
Right.
You like, everybody get laptops. No, sometimes they might say, actually, you can only use this vendor, or this vendor for those technology purchases. And so you just have to be aware of what you can spend your money on, what their processes are, any approvals you might need to get before just going off and telling your staff, you know what, everybody gonna get laptops now. And it's just like, yeah, that's not how that works. And typically people will put more money into staffing than they need, which is fine. We encourage that. Definitely put more money into your staffing dollars. But then when they notice they're not spending those staffing dollars, I always tell people, when you start really noticing that the way you're trending, you're not going to use all of that money, speak up at that point. Don't wait until the program's almost over and you're just like, oh, I forgot. Now we have an extra $80,000 in, this line item that we're not going to be able to spend now. So we just want to spend it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that you pay attention to those adjustments throughout the year so that you can go back to your grant manager, have those discussions about, well, where else can we spend this money?
Mm-hmm.
Because people like waiting to the last minute and then you don't get approved for those changes. And then you're mad because you just left all this money on the table.
Right.
And you have to give it back,
Right. This is a good moment for us to take a pause, y'all. I got to marinate on this. So give us a moment. Go ahead, stretch your legs, get something to drink, take care of personal business. We're going to go ahead and take care of these bills, and we will see y'all in like 5 seconds. All right, y'all. Don't go too far. We'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. We are talking about grant writing for the after school programs today. We're going to help you get your money right. That's what we're going to do. We sure are. So I have Shavon on the show with me. She is an entrepreneur. She is a grant writer.
We're going to call it a grant collaborator is what
There
I'm
we go.
going to tell people. It is a grant collaborator because I collaborate with you to help you write the grant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one time you're done, you're going to have skills. You're going to know how to write these grants. And you're going to go out here and you're going to win it all. Okay? All right. So Shavon is giving us some tips, some tricks, some things to focus on when you are going through that process, being that we are approaching the season where it's time to apply for these grants, especially going into the fall, get this money for your organization, but also for your staff and for the children, keeping some things in mind. So with that being said, Shavon, I know in our last segment, we talked about going through the process of writing the grant, knowing that once you get to a certain point, you can't just automatically change your mind and be like, oh, we got money, leftover money, so we're going to spend it on this. That's not how that works. That's so not how that works. So keeping in mind before you get to that process of switching, after you find out you do have leftover money, what are some things that organizations should keep in mind in the writing process? Because that's where the meat is, as you expressed in the first half. Knowing what you are going for and being specific about what you need this money for. And being realistic about what you can do. Amen. Not what you dream you can do. There's a difference.
Great question. I would say a few things for organizations to keep in mind going into the grant writing process. The first thing is to know and understand your RFP, which is your request for proposal, or it might be your RFA, request for applications. Know exactly what those guidelines are. Mm-hmm. So you really need to read that document front to back several times because it's going to list in there what is allowed, what is not allowed, what you can expect, what they're looking for. It should talk about the evaluation or the monitoring of everything and specifically pay attention to the budget aspect. What are those allowable charges versus the non-allowable charges? If it mentions who the grant manager is, make sure that you know who that person is. Mm-hmm. Typically, they will have a technical assistance session prior to the grant closing. Attend the technical assistance session because that is an opportunity for you to ask questions. They will share information. They will answer all of your questions. You will get to meet who those people are. Mm-hmm. And you can get clarity on things that may not have been very clear as you were reading through the document. Surprisingly enough, a lot of people do not attend the technical assistance sessions. And then they're like, well, I'm just going to apply anyways, which is great. And nowadays, a lot of the technical assistance sessions are recorded. So even if you
Mm-hmm.
don't get an opportunity to attend live, go back and listen to the recording. You might see that other people asked questions. You may have had some questions about, and again, note who those grant managers are because you might have some things that come up. Reach out to them.
Mm-hmm.
So get clear on what the RFP or the RFA, right, the request for proposal or the request for application, be clear on what those guidelines are. That
Mm-hmm.
is really the first and foremost thing people should understand before applying for any grant. The second thing, and this is so important, but I feel like not enough people spend enough time on it. Have a budget that makes sense. I'm going to say it again. Have a budget that makes sense.
For the
Have
people in the
a
balcony.
that make right, like it has to make sense for your organization's capacity. If you are applying for a grant and they are awarding organizations $700,000, if you have never managed your program over $150,000, you are not at the point where you can manage $750,000 or whatever that you're not there yet. You don't have the capacity. I know everybody want to be like, but they said, but here's what I know and here's what I've seen from experience. If the most your organization has ever managed was a very small amount, it's going to be difficult for you to ramp it up in such a quick turnaround to be able to meet that monetary amount, right? We are in a space where it's hard to find staffing. So it's not that easy to just go out and say, well, I'm going to hire 15 more people. Good luck, boo. Good luck. Organizations are having such a hard time with staffing. So you have to be able to meet the demands of your program and meet those outcomes with whatever staff you have right now. So just make sure that your budget makes sense for your capacity. Here's also another tidbit about budgets. Again, sounds so simple, but it's very important. Make sure your math is correct. Make sure your math is correct. You will get dinged if your numbers do not add up the way that you say that they are supposed to add up. So just be clear. Budgets are something that I don't think people spend enough time on. I encourage people to not only have a budget, but also write a budget narrative. Sometimes grant proposals ask for a budget narrative. Sometimes they don't. I would suggest you have a budget narrative. What in the world is a budget narrative, you might be asking, Shavon? It is basically a description, a thorough description of every line item you are budgeting for. So instead of just saying we are spending $30,000 on supplies, in your budget narrative, you are going to be descriptive about what are those supplies. Are those books for students? Are those, $10,000 on art supplies, $20,000 on, school supplies, pencils and pens? Do you need $5,000 for office supplies? Create a budget narrative because that's going to be your guide to make sure that you actually understand even the small things that's going to go into this line item.
Mm-hmm.
For your staffing, make sure that in your budget you lay out how your staff are getting paid. I always tell people it should be formulaic, meaning that for every staff member, you should project out the number of hours they're going to work for however many weeks. How much do they get paid per hour? Right? That is called your time and efforts documentation, and it is actually required for federal grants. You have to lay that out. And again, the math has to make sense. If the math ain't mathing, if the math ain't mathing, y'all, as your grant manager, it is going to be difficult for me to do my own checks and balances. And if it's difficult for me to do my job, do you think I'm going to give you money? So you're going to make it difficult for me to do my job? Absolutely not. I don't want to give you money if you're going to make my job difficult, because then I'm going to have to be chasing you every 5 minutes. So for your staff, and when you're in your budget narrative, make sure that you are laying out for each staff their salary, how many hours they're projected to make, how much money that's going to be for the duration of your program. Do those hours include professional development? Do they get paid a different amount for professional development versus what they get paid when they work in the program? All of those things, because sometimes people say, oh, well, they get paid a different amount when we do training versus what we pay them. That has to be communicated. All of that should be laid out in your budget. So make sure your budget makes sense for your capacity and you create a budget narrative. There should be descriptions for every line item that you're going to have in your budget. That's going to help you, and that's going to help your grant reviewer and your grant manager understand a little bit better how you're going to be spending this money.
Mm-hmm.
And then another tip, what should you know beforehand? Please proofread. I am going to go back to proofreading. Please, you have to. You have to proofread, right? You have to proofread because it makes a difference. And make sure you're answering all of the questions. Mm. Please don't spend 5 pages telling me about something that doesn't matter. It's not even in the grant application, because I'm going to skip over those bits and pieces of information. So just make sure that you're hitting the questions right on the head and that you do have someone ready to review. Right. Last tip, because this is going to be in grant applications. How are you going to manage the finances?
Hey.
Yeah. Are you going to use QuickBooks, FreshBooks, HelloBooks, whatever software? You do need to state which software you're going to use. Mm-hmm. Typically, you do have to provide a description of the person. And they want to know that whatever person you're using to manage the grant on your end, the financial aspect of it, do they have experience in grant management? Right? Mm-hmm. They know what they're doing. So definitely put a sentence or two or even a little paragraph about how you're going to manage the funds and who's going to manage the funds, because that is really going to show a grant reviewer and a grant manager that, again, your capacity is expanded to where someone is going to be dedicated to making sure things are lining up.
I know that's right. Go ahead.
Yeah, because sometimes, executive directors try to do everything.
But you can't. You one person. Doing 25,000 other things.
Exactly.
No, don't.
It's just like, tell people it's worth it if you don't have a staff member. Outsource it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Outsource grant management. You can outsource that, because you know who else does that? The government, right? They outsource it, so why can't you? You can outsource your grants management if you need to, but make sure you have someone who is skilled, who can manage your funds.
Right. If they are looking to outsource, where would they go about looking for that information or for that individual? Is there any websites they could look at, or somebody need to tag on social media? Like, where could they get that help?
I would honestly say, this is Google. I hate to say it, but it's just like, really Google. This is where networking, if you ask me, comes into play. Like, I have met so many people at networking events in the nonprofit space who I have found out offer so many other services, right? Yeah. So go and do a Google search, because here's the thing about grants management. They don't have to be in your local area. All of that can be done remotely. So you can find a Google, do a Google search for a grants manager anywhere. Also look on Upwork. Upwork, is a place you can go and find contractors. And they do have people who say that they are grants management, grants writing, all of that. Mm-hmm. They are on Upwork. So try your luck there as well.
Check their credentials. Make sure you do your background work.
Oh, absolutely. Treat them like however you would an employee. Interview them. your checks and balances. But you can find people out there to outsource grants management to.
No, awesome. Well, Shavon, thank you for this interview. We're going to go ahead and jump into our professionals lounge section so you can finish dropping these gems for us that are on staff and we're trying to work this out. Okay. Professionals Lounge is a segment of the show that allows guests to share advice with other practitioners in the OST and youth development field about how they can begin growing their gifts and talents, but also develop themselves as professionals in the field. Here's our Professionals Lounge conversation. All right, Shavon. So, for Professionals Lounge, my question for you is how can out of school time professionals branch out of their area of where they work? It could be being a frontline worker, it could be them potentially working in finance, whichever area or whichever sector they're in. How can they branch out and do a career that they're interested in?
That is such a great question. I'm so glad you asked because life moves very fast. And I think the pandemic, while it sucked, there was an added benefit. Now there are so many universities offering these really quick certifications and programs online now. And that is such a great way for people to upskill, right? So LinkedIn, you would have to pay, I think it's like $40 a month or something. But there are so many different courses on LinkedIn that you can take. And then, of course, because it's on LinkedIn, it'll give you the badge or a certificate. But they have, you could do learning and development, you could do finance, you could do DEI. They have so many courses. So I would say look on a LinkedIn. There were a couple of universities that were offering quick certification classes that were free. Mm-hmm. University of South Florida is one of them. I think I have gotten my maybe 3 certifications from them. I have. So always look for opportunities to get a nice quick certification and be open to learning new things. Right. So that's one way, is to constantly be a learner. Go on LinkedIn or any other digital platform and take some courses. The second thing is to network. Network. I know during the pandemic, a lot of people had gotten away from the conferences and doing in-person things. But now that we are kind of coming out of this into this new normal, folks are going back to it. I have gotten so many opportunities because I've been in the room. Network. Just go be in the room with people, introduce yourself, and let people know what you're interested in. Because I always tell people, closed mouths don't get fed. I cannot read your mind. So open your mouth and advocate for yourself. You know, people be like, I ain't going to tell nobody that I want to do this. I'm not going to tell anybody that one day I want to be an executive director. Well, then how are people going to help you if you don't say anything? And I always tell people, if you feel you are surrounded by people who are not advocating for you or who don't want to help you, find a new circle, boo.
You right.
Right? Find a new circle. Then you are around the wrong people. I can't tell you how many opportunities I've gotten because somebody knew me and they dropped my name in a room. And that has led to 6 figures worth of opportunities. You see what I'm saying? Because somebody knew me and I had expressed to them I was interested in shifting career-wise into a new field. So bet on yourself. Put your name out there. Constantly up-level your skills. But that's really the advice I would give anyone who might be interested in shifting into different areas of their career, you know, and just be open. You don't, I tell my daughter this, you do not have to stay in one thing forever. You can pivot as many times as you want to.
Right.
That is your audacity. So you do not have to say, well, I just got into this field, so that means I have to dedicate 3 to 5 years of my life. No, if you got over there and it wasn't giving what it was supposed to give, find something else.
Right.
Do something else. That's the beauty of just having experience, being willing to jump around and get new things and learn new skills. Because one day somebody's going to be like, wow, you actually have a little bit of experience in a whole bunch of stuff. And that really interests me. So I would definitely give those two bits of advice. Upskill yourself. So constantly be looking for opportunities to learn new things. And then the second one is to network. Network, network, network.
I know that's right. So, well, everybody, that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you for sharing this time with us. Shavon, if anybody want to get in touch with you for grant writing or grant coaching and doing these assessments for their program, because we back out here.
Yes,
How to get in touch with you.
I'm back out here. People can contact me via email. That's the best way for folks to reach out to me. You can contact me at the dkconsultants@gmail.com. So THEDKCONSULTANTS@gmail.com.
Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our show. I'd like to thank Shavon for being here and being an awesome guest today. Thank you for coming and dropping all these gems. Hopefully, it helps someone as they're going through this grant process. Maybe we could have you again on the 4th season to talk us through how to wrap up a grant year. So we're making sure we're crossing all our T's and dotting all our I's to make sure we don't leave any money on the table. If you enjoyed this episode and feel you received some good information, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or visit the Podchaser website and leave us a comment. This will help us get feedback on the show and collect testimonials for our personal website. Share us with your friends, share us with your family, share us with your network. Help us spread the word about how out of school time programming is impacting our youth, but also our communities. We can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. Well, that's all I have for today. In the words of Mr. Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Until next time, bye-bye.